hospital had been using his invention for 4 years that same night. It almost didn't let him through the door to reach his son. Malcolm Pierce arrived at Northeastern Children's Medical Center at 6:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before his 8-year-old son was scheduled to be wheeled into the cardiac suite on the 4th floor. His jacket still had grease on the left sleeve, engine oil from the portable generator he'd spent the last 2 hours repairing at a free clinic in the south end of the city. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He'd driven 31 minutes through early morning traffic with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping his phone, calling his mother back 3 times to make sure Eli was still calm, still breathing, still asking about the blue dinosaur he'd left on the counter at home. Malcolm had the dinosaur in his jacket pocket when the woman at the pre-op reception desk told him he could not go through. "Sir, your name isn't listed as the confirmed guardian on record." The intake paperwork was processed under Evelyn Pierce. He stood very still. "That's my mother," he said. "She signed the admission forms because I was still in transit. I am Eli's father. I have full medical proxy. We don't have that documentation in the system. I submitted it last week." "I understand that, sir. But if it hasn't been verified, my son is 8 years old, and he's about to have open heart surgery." The woman looked at her screen rather than at him. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't authorize entry to the pre-op area without confirmed guardian status." Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He'd learned a long time ago that in rooms like this one, rooms with clean floors and fluorescent light and people in lanyards who controlled access to things you needed, raising your voice was the fastest way to become the problem. So he breathed. He kept his hands still. He looked past the woman's shoulder through the reinforced glass of the pre-op suite door and found his son. Eli was in the second bed from the left, small under a pale blue blanket. A wristband circled one thin arm, and an IV line ran to the back of his right hand, and the blue plastic dinosaur, a different one, the hospital's, placed there by a well-meaning technician, was propped against his pillow in exactly the wrong position, because Eli always slept with his dinosaurs facing the door. Malcolm placed one hand flat against the glass. Eli turned his head. The boy's eyes found his father immediately, the way they always did. Across parking lots and crowded cafeterias and school lobbies, some calibration built between them that required no effort and no searching. Eli's mouth moved. "Daddy." If there was one sentence that had kept Malcolm Pierce vertical through the worst 4 years of his life, it was that single word in his son's voice. Not whispered or shouted, just said, the way a child says a word that means safety. He pressed his palm harder against the glass. A door opened to his left, and a young doctor came through, tall and clean-shaved, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had somewhere more important to be. His badge read Dr. Nathan Mercer, Pediatric Cardiothoracic Surgery Fellow. He was perhaps 32. He looked at Malcolm the way people often looked at Malcolm when he was wearing work clothes and had not slept, with an assessment so quick it barely qualified as a look. "Is there a problem?" Mercer asked the nurse. Unverified family member requesting pre-op access. Mercer turned to Malcolm. He took in the jacket, the worn work boots, the dark circles under his eyes, the grease on the sleeve. 2 seconds, maybe less. "Sir, I understand this is a stressful situation, but we can't allow unverified individuals into the sterile pre-op area." "I'm not an unverified individual. I'm his father. In the system, my son does not live inside your system. Dr. Mercer, he's right there." Malcolm pointed through the glass. 8 years old, congenital cardiac defect, scheduled for valve repair in 11 minutes. And he's looking at me right now through a piece of glass, because a paperwork delay has put me on the wrong side of a door. Mercer's expression didn't shift. "I understand, sir. But the protocol—" "Before you proceed," Malcolm said, "has anyone reviewed Eli's MRI from yesterday morning?" Mercer stopped. "The lateral branch anomaly," Malcolm said. "Left secondary arterial branch. The standard insertion approach will create pressure concentration at the second junction. The device needs to be rotated 17 degrees off-axis before lock-in. If no one has flagged that, I need someone to flag it right now." The nurse looked up from her screen. "Mercer, looked at Malcolm as though he had just spoken in a language Mercer hadn't expected him to know. "Where did you get that information?" "From the imaging my son's cardiologist ordered." "You don't have access to those images. I reviewed them when Dr. Okafor walked us through the procedure plan on Wednesday. Are you a physician?" Malcolm said nothing. Mercer's eyes moved across him again. The jacket, the boots, the tired face. And this time they settled into something less neutral, something that had already decided. "Sir, I'd caution you against using terminology you may have picked up online to try to intervene in a procedure you don't have the technical background to understand." Behind Malcolm, a security guard appeared at the end of the hall. The nurse had pressed something under the desk. Malcolm saw it happen, processed it, did not react. In the pre-op suite, Eli had started to sit up. The IV line pulled taut. A surgical tech stepped toward him gently, pressed a hand to his small shoulder, said something meant to calm him, but Eli was watching, his father's father, and his eyes were filling, and he could not reach his father, and his father could not reach him. And there was a pane of glass between them that had nothing to do with medicine. Malcolm reached into his pocket and set the blue plastic dinosaur on the counter between him and the nurse. "Please give this to my son," he said. The nurse did not move. "Please." Dr. Mercer reached over and took the dinosaur, perhaps because it was the easiest way to end the interaction. As he lifted it, a manila folder on the surgical cart beside him slipped and fell, scattering several laminated equipment sheets across the polished floor. A second nurse, younger, early 20s, her badge still pristine, knelt to gather them. She picked up the first sheet, glanced at it by reflex, and stopped. It was the device specification guide for the Pierce Pediatric Flow Stabilizer, the cardiac support instrument scheduled for use in Eli's procedure. The sheet was standard issue. Hospitals ordered it with every unit. At the bottom right corner of the diagram, just above the patent registration code, was a line of small type that nobody read because why would they? It said, "Inventor, Dr. Malcolm A. Pierce, MD, PhD, Biomedical Engineering." The young nurse looked at the sheet. She looked at the man standing in front of the desk. "Dr. Pierce," she said. Her voice came out a half-step quieter than she intended. The hallway went super still. Dr. Mercer turned, slowly. He looked at the sheet in the nurse's hand, then at the man who had not slept, had not eaten, had motor oil on his sleeve, had one hand against a glass pane, and the other in the pocket of a jacket bought from a clearance rack 4 winters ago. Malcolm looked back at him. He didn't say anything. He had said everything he needed to say. The device in the surgical suite had his name on it. His son was in the surgical suite. These two facts did not require his commentary, but in the space between them, something shifted that no one in the hallway could have fully articulated. It was the recognition that the world had been running on his work for 4 years, calling on his precision and his care and his sleepless nights in a laboratory. And when he had walked through the front door of the institution that used his invention every single week, they had looked at what he was wearing before they looked at who he was. And the most unbearable part, the part that settled into Malcolm's chest and stayed there, was not the wrongness of it. It was the fact that if that sheet of paper had not slipped off a cart at exactly that moment, the door would have remained closed. The security guard would have walked him to a waiting room. His son would have gone under anesthesia without ever seeing his father's face on the other side of the glass. That was what the system had almost done. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, because this story is about a lot more than one door, and we think you need to hear all of it. Malcolm Pierce had grown up in a part of the city that did not have a name people used in positive contexts. His mother, Evelyn, worked double shifts as a licensed practical nurse at a small community hospital that smelled like floor wax and old coffee and never had enough of anything. He remembered sitting in the break room as a child, doing homework on the same table where his mother ate her lunch, watching her move from room to room with a competence and a steadiness that the institution chronically underpaid and rarely acknowledged. He remembered the pediatric ward, the children who came through with things wrong inside them, things that needed machines and procedures and specialized equipment that the community hospital didn't have. He remembered the transfers, the way the nurses spoke about them in low voices, the way his mother would come home some evenings and sit in the kitchen for a long time without starting dinner, her hands flat on the table. He was 11 years old the first time he understood that geography was a medical diagnosis. So he studied. He took apart every device he could find, every radio, every broken appliance, every piece of discarded electronics from the back of the repair shop on Clement Street. He understood machines before he understood people. He understood how things were supposed to work, and more importantly, how they failed and why, and what you could do about it if you were paying close enough attention. He earned a full scholarship to study biomedical engineering. He was the kind of student professors called remarkable in letters of recommendation, and occasionally failed to seat at the right table when it mattered. He had been asked, more than once, whether he was in the wrong room, whether he was there for the maintenance crew, whether he had gotten turned around on his way somewhere else. He had learned to answer those questions with silence, and then to return to his work, which was always better than the question. He went on to complete an MD and a doctorate. He did not do this to impress anyone. He did it because the problems he wanted to solve required every tool available. He was in his laboratory at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, running a test cycle on a prototype flow regulator he'd been refining for 2 years, when the door opened and a woman walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee she had made herself from the nurse's station machine down the hall. Her name was Lena Graves. She worked in the patient advocacy office, which meant she spent her days fighting bureaucracies on behalf of families who didn't know they had the right to fight back. She had a face that was precise in its expressions. She did not waste warmth on people who hadn't earned it, and she did not withhold it from people who had. She handed Malcolm one of the coffees without asking whether he wanted it. "What does that do?" she asked, looking at the prototype. He told her. He explained it the way he always did when he actually wanted someone to understand. Not simplified, not performed, just honest. He told her about the children he'd watched get transferred when he was young. He told her about the pressure differentials in pediatric cardiac flow, the specific risks in corrective valve surgery for children with anatomical anomalies, the way the existing devices on the market had been designed for an adult standard that didn't translate well to smaller, more fragile structures. He told her that he was trying to build something better, something precise enough and affordable enough that it didn't require a zip code to access. Lena listened the way she listened to families in her office, fully, without interruption, without the distraction of formulating her response. When he finished, she said, "Don't build this for a patent. Build it for the kids who get transferred." He looked at her. "You know what happens when something like this gets patented and commercialized and the price goes up?" she said. "The kids with the right insurance get it. The kids without it get what was there before, which means you'll have built something brilliant and handed it to the market to decide who deserves to live." Malcolm set down his coffee. "I know that." "Then build into the guardrail," she said, "before you hand it to anyone." He did not do it for her. He did it because she was right, and he already knew she was right. And sometimes it takes another person saying the thing out loud to make you commit to it as a principle rather than an intention. They married 3 years later. Eli arrived in the spring of their 4th year together, and the night before he was born, Malcolm sat in the hospital chair beside Lena's bed and felt the particular terror of a man who understood exactly what could go wrong inside the human body. The tests had shown an irregularity in the baby's cardiac development, not critical, not certain to require intervention, but present and noted, and something they would watch. Lena reached over and took his hand. "Then you'd better make sure it works," she said. She meant the device. She always knew what he was thinking before he said it, and she had never used that knowledge against him. "It already works," he said. "For the kids without the good insurance too," she said. "Promise me." He promised. Eli was born the next morning. Small, loud, furious at the cold. Malcolm held him in the delivery room and felt something rearrange permanently inside his chest. Not the terror, but the anchor, the thing that would hold him in place, no matter how rough the current got. For 3 years, everything was possible. The device was completed. It worked. It was tested and certified and written up in 2 peer-reviewed journals. Malcolm was invited to present at conferences he had once sat outside of, and he went, and he said what needed to be said, and he came home to a 2-year-old who called dinosaurs Saurus and an apartment where Lena always had something on the stove. Then Victor Lang called. Victor Lang ran Langford Med Systems, a medical device company with distribution networks in 48 states and contracts with 300 hospitals. He was persuasive in the way of men who had practiced persuasion as a professional skill. He knew when to lean in, when to let silence do the work, when to make an offer sound like a gift. He offered to bring the Pierce Pediatric Flow Stabilizer to market at scale. Malcolm agreed on conditions. 3 of them, non-negotiable. The device price would be held at a level accessible to community hospitals. The component specifications would not be altered without his sign-off. A program would be established to provide the device to pediatric patients without adequate coverage. Lang agreed to everything. The contract was signed. Production began. Within 18 months, the device was in use at 67 hospitals. Within 2 years, it was the standard of care for its indicated procedure. Malcolm's name was on every box, every specification sheet, every technical guide. And then, quietly, the changes started. The affordable pricing tier was eliminated in the 3rd year of distribution. The components at the internal locking mechanism were switched to a lower-grade supplier without notice. The Community Access Program became a press release that referenced a foundation that did not have a working phone number. Malcolm raised these things in writing. His emails were answered with corporate language that said nothing while sounding thorough. He was informed, in a meeting he was not warned about in advance, that his advisory role did not include operational oversight. It was Lena who found the technical report. She'd gotten it from a contact in the hospital compliance world, a document produced by Langford's own internal quality team, flagging irregularities in the new locking component's performance under pressure, recommending additional testing before continued distribution. The recommendation had been dated 8 months earlier. The component was still shipping. She laid the document on the kitchen table in front of Malcolm. He read it once. He read it again. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. What happened next happened, the way these things always happen, when a private company has enough money and a problem it needs to contain. Langford's legal team filed a preemptive response, claiming Malcolm had breached the terms of his advisory agreement by accessing proprietary performance data. They leaked a story to a trade publication, describing him as an unstable figure who had been making unreasonable demands and threatening litigation. The hospital system where he held a research affiliation quietly did not renew his contract. He was not fired. He was made irrelevant. There is a difference, and the difference is that being made irrelevant leaves no paperwork to challenge. Through all of it, Lena kept moving. She built a case. She gathered statements from hospital compliance officers, filed formal complaints with the FDA, and contacted 2 patient advocacy organizations she had worked with for years. She was meticulous and methodical, and she did not stop. She was on her way to deliver a set of documents to her attorney's office on a Wednesday afternoon in November when a driver ran a red light at the intersection of 2 streets. Malcolm would never be able to drive through again. The collision was catastrophic. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Malcolm did not speak at her funeral. He could not find the words in any order that felt adequate, and he was not willing to perform grief in order to satisfy the expectation that he should say something. His mother stood beside him. Eli, who was 4 years old and did not yet understand what permanently meant, held his father's hand and looked up at him every few minutes, checking. He withdrew the legal complaint 6 weeks after Lena died, not because he had lost the will to fight. because he could not simultaneously fight and be a father, and being a father was the only thing he was certain Eli needed from him that no one else could provide. He resigned from every affiliated position. He sold his advisory stake. He walked away from the world that had taken everything from him, except his son and his name on a patent he no longer controlled. He got a contractor's license and started taking maintenance calls from community clinics. He repaired portable generators and ultrasound machines and refrigeration units for vaccine storage. He was good at it. He was good at everything mechanical, and the clinics needed him, and the work paid enough to keep the apartment and keep Eli's medications filled and keep the lights on. He slept on the sofa some nights so he could hear his son breathing. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on a street where the parking was always a problem, and the elevator worked most of the time. 2 bedrooms, one of which had been converted into a space that was equal parts Eli's bedroom and natural history museum. Shelves of plastic and rubber dinosaurs in careful arrangements, a periodic table poster on the wall that Eli had memorized by age 6, a cork board with his own drawings pinned to it in neat rows. The drawings were of hearts mostly, not the Valentine kind, the anatomical kind, rendered in crayon with the patient inaccuracy of a child who had been told about his own heart so many times that it had become a subject of study rather than a source of fear. In one drawing the heart had legs and a tail. In another it wore a small suit of armor. Eli called it the heart with the shield. "Is it the shield that's broken?" Eli asked once, during a quiet evening when Malcolm was helping him with a school project, and the television was off. Malcolm looked at the drawing. "No," he said, "the shield is fine, it just needs a door." "What kind of door?" "One that lets the right amount through." Eli thought about this. He picked up the green crayon and added a door to the drawing, like the doors at school that only let you in if you have a badge. Something like that. "That seems dumb," Eli said. "What if someone forgets their badge?" Malcolm looked at his son for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "it does seem dumb." The surgery had been discussed for 2 years, not casually. There had never been anything casual about the conversations Malcolm had with Eli's cardiologist, Dr. Okafor, or about the condition itself. Eli's anomaly had been stable in early childhood, but the measurements had shifted in the last 18 months in a direction that made intervention no longer optional. The valve was not failing. It was not doing its job with the efficiency a growing body required, and would require even more urgently in the years ahead. Dr. Okafor had been direct. She had also been kind, which Malcolm respected, because directness and kindness were harder to practice together than either one alone. The procedure selected was a valve repair, using the Pierce Pediatric Flow Stabilizer. Malcolm had sat across from Dr. Okafor's desk the afternoon she made that recommendation, and had said nothing for a long moment. "I know," she said. She knew his history. Most of the physicians in the city who worked in pediatric cardiology knew his history, or some version of it. "Is there another option you'd prefer?" "No," he said. "It's the right device, for the right anatomy, if it's installed correctly." "Tell me what I need to know," he told her. He went through Eli's specific anatomy, the lateral branch anomaly, the implications for approach angle, the exact adjustment he believed would be necessary. Dr. Okafor wrote everything down. She said she would share it with the surgical team. Malcolm drove home afterward, picked up Eli from his mother's apartment, made dinner, helped Eli finish a drawing of a brachiosaurus for his science notebook, and sat on the side of the boy's bed until he fell asleep. Then he went to the kitchen and sat at the table in the dark, for a long time, his hands flat on the surface, breathing. He had built something to save children like Eli. Now he was going to have to trust a system he did not fully trust to use it on his own son. On the morning of the surgery, Malcolm was at a clinic on the south side by 5:30, repairing a generator that had gone down in the night. Without power, the clinic's refrigeration units would fail, and everything stored inside them would be lost. He could not leave until it was running. He called his mother, who was already with Eli at the hospital. He called twice more on the drive over. He arrived at 6:47. 13 minutes, he did not make it through the door. When Dr. Mercer read the name on the equipment sheet, he was quiet for 4 full seconds. Malcolm counted them. They were the loudest 4 seconds in the hall. Dr. Pierce. Mercer said it the way people say a name they recognize from a place they didn't expect to encounter it. "You're the patent holder." "I'm Eli's father," Malcolm said. "I've been Eli's father since before the patent. I'd like to go be with him now." The door opened. Not because the paperwork had been resolved, not because the system had corrected itself. Because a nurse with a pristine badge had bent down at the right moment and picked up the right piece of paper, and the information printed on it had forced a recognition that should have existed. The moment Malcolm Pierce walked through the front door of the hospital, that used his device every week of every year. He walked through. He crossed the pre-op floor in 8 steps and sat on the edge of his son's bed and put his hand over the boy's small, IV-threaded hand and said nothing at all. Eli pressed his face sideways into his father's jacket sleeve, the one with the grease on it. "You smell like machines," Eli said. "I know. I'm sorry. I don't mind." Eli was quiet for a moment. "Daddy, the machine they're going to put in me, is it yours?" Malcolm looked down at him. "Part of it," he said. "Mostly it belongs to you now." Dr. Ruth Harlan arrived 10 minutes later. She was in her late 50s, the department head, a woman who had held this job through 4 hospital administrations, and had the particular composure of someone who had seen many things go wrong in operating rooms, and had chosen, each time, to stay and fix them rather than leave and be comfortable. She and Malcolm had worked in the same institution for 2 years before his departure. She had not stopped him from leaving, and he had never asked her to, but he knew she had watched him go with something that fell short of helplessness and short of guilt and lived somewhere in the complicated space between them. She stood in the doorway of the pre-op bay. "Malcolm," she said, "I didn't know Eli was your son." "Nobody asked enough questions," he said. She accepted that. "Tell me what you flagged," he told her again. "The lateral branch, the angle." She had the imaging pulled up on a tablet within minutes, and they stood at the foot of Eli's bed. Eli temporarily occupied by the blue dinosaur from Malcolm's pocket, which was now properly facing the door, and Malcolm walked her through the anatomy. Harlan listened. She asked 2 technical questions. Malcolm answered both. Then she said, "I want you in the observation room." Mercer, who had followed them in and stood near the door, with the expression of someone renegotiating their understanding of a situation, said nothing. Eli was sedated at 7:48. Malcolm stood in the glass-walled observation room, above the surgical suite, and watched. He watched the team prepare, watched the field established, watched Dr. Harlan take her position. He watched Dr. Mercer move with technical precision, and he understood, watching, that Mercer was genuinely skilled. That the failure earlier had not been a failure of competence, but of imagination. Mercer had not been able to imagine that the man in the work jacket might know more than he did about the device in his hands. The procedure moved well until the 3rd sequence. Malcolm saw it before anyone called it. The stabilizer's secondary locking mechanism. The component Langford had switched to the cheaper supplier 4 years ago, was responding with a delay. A fraction of a second under standard pressure, insignificant in most anatomical configurations, fatal in this one, with this particular approach angle, in this particular 8-year-old's chest. He pressed the intercom button. "Don't engage the secondary lock. Hold manual pressure before you fix position. If the lock engages under that delay, you'll lose laminar flow at the junction." Mercer looked up through the glass, his jaw set. Dr. Harlan said, "Do it." Mercer held. He kept manual pressure on the fitting. The reading stabilized. They completed the fixation by hand, held it for the necessary interval, and the flow numbers came through clean. Eli's heart held the repair. Afterward, when Eli was in recovery and the monitors were steady, and the numbers said what Malcolm needed them to say, he sat in a chair beside the bed and put his forehead against his son's hand, and stayed there. He did not pray. He did not think about anything beyond the warmth of his son's skin and the slow, regular sound of the monitor. Eli came around slowly, the way children do from anesthesia, surfacing in small stages, reaching before arriving. "Daddy, right here." Eli's eyes opened. They had trouble focusing. "Daddy, I heard you, in the room. I heard your voice." Malcolm was quiet for a moment. "You weren't supposed to be able to hear anything." "I know," Eli said. "But I knew it was you." The hospital's administration reached Malcolm before the day was over. The patient relations director came to the recovery room, introduced herself, expressed that the institution was deeply sorry for the administrative confusion that morning, that steps were being taken to review the intake process, that they hoped the family felt supported during what had been a difficult day. She was professional and careful, and the language she used was the language of organizations that wanted things contained before they could become costly. Malcolm listened to all of it. "I'd like to see the clinical incident reports from the last 8 months, he said when she finished. "All procedures involving this device, all notes regarding performance irregularities." The woman's professional expression did not change. "Those records would require a formal request process." "I'm aware of the process," Malcolm said. "I'll have counsel file for them in the morning. I wanted you to know before the filing, so the response wouldn't look like concealment." She left. Nurse Rosa Delgado came in the same evening, just before her shift ended. She was a woman in her early 60s who had worked the cardiac ward for more years than she kept count of, and she had known Malcolm when he was still affiliated with the hospital, back when his name was on a plaque in the lab that still bore it. She did not announce herself. She pulled a chair to the side of Eli's bed, glanced at the boy sleeping, and set a folded piece of paper on the tray table. "I wrote down the ones I could remember," she said quietly. "Complications in the last 2 quarters, all flagged as patient-specific, none flagged as device-related. Dr. Mercer tried to escalate one of them in March. He was told the documentation didn't support the conclusion." Malcolm looked at the paper. He thought about a technical report on a kitchen table. He thought about the specific weight of something that arrives too late to change the past, but not too late to change what comes next. "Thank you, Rosa," he said. Victor Lang arrived at the hospital the following morning. He had not called ahead. Men like Victor Lang did not call ahead, because calling ahead implied that the other party had the option to prepare. He found Malcolm in the corridor outside Eli's room, dressed in the same clothes, looking, if possible, more tired than before. "Malcolm." Lang's voice carried the particular warmth of a man accustomed to being liked. "I heard about Eli. I'm relieved he came through." "Are you?" Lang clasped his hands in front of him. "I know the last few years have been complicated between us, and I want to be direct with you about what I think we can do to address some of those complications, for you and for Eli." "Victor," Malcolm said, "I know what you're going to offer me. Then you know it's generous. I know it's designed to look generous while costing the company less than the alternative." Malcolm looked at him without heat. "You're going to offer to pay Eli's medical bills. You're going to offer to restore some version of my advisory role. You might offer a named fellowship or a foundation grant. You're going to frame it as reconciliation." Lang held his expression. "And in exchange," Malcolm continued, "you'd like me not to talk publicly about the component switch, or the suppressed quality report, or the fact that the locking mechanism on your current production run performed with a measurable delay under pressure in a pediatric surgical setting yesterday morning." A pause. "You still have the same name on the patent, Malcolm. That creates shared liability if I pursue this, the liability is shared. If I don't pursue this, the liability is yours exclusively, because you are the one who changed the components without approval, suppressed the internal report, and continued shipping a product you knew had a flagged performance issue." Malcolm looked at him steadily. "My name on that patent is the thing you were counting on to keep me quiet. It didn't occur to you that it was also the reason I was in this building yesterday morning, when someone needed to know how to use the device correctly." Lang left without making the offer formally. He walked back through the lobby and out the main entrance, and Malcolm watched him go and felt nothing in particular about it except a kind of clarity. The meeting convened 5 days later. Eli was home by then, resting, eating soup, arguing with Malcolm about which dinosaur movie they were going to watch for the third evening in a row. Malcolm had arranged his mother to stay with Eli for the afternoon. The conference room held 8 people: Dr. Harlan, 2 members of the hospital's executive board, the chief of legal affairs, a representative from the hospital's patient advocacy department, a position Lena had once inhabited, a representative from Langford Med Systems, not Lang himself, he had sent his deputy, and Dr. Mercer, who had asked to be present, and whose request the board had honored. Malcolm laid the materials on the table before any opening statement was made. The original device specifications, the modified production versions, the internal quality report that Langford's own team had written and not acted on, Nurse Rose's notes, organized and dated, the record of his written warnings to Langford 4 years prior. He spoke for 19 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He did not employ rhetoric. He said what the document said, in the order the events had occurred, and let the accumulation speak for itself. "I'm not here because I was humiliated in the hallway Monday morning," he said at the end. "I'm here because I know how many Ellis there are. I know which hospitals they're in. And I know which of those hospitals are using the current production run of this device. And I know that the parents of those children do not have my name on a patent that might accidentally fall to the floor at the right moment and compel someone to listen." Harlan said, "The institution will suspend use of the current production run effective immediately, pending independent review. We will report the performance irregularity to the FDA. We will cooperate fully with any subsequent investigation." The Langford representative said they would need to consult with. Harlan said, "No, this is not a consultation. This is notification of what the institution is doing, with or without your company's cooperation." Mercer had said nothing through the entire meeting. He was the youngest person in the room, and he sat with his hands flat on the table, looking at the documents rather than the people. When the room began to empty, he stayed. Malcolm was the last to stand. "Dr. Pierce," Mercer said. Malcolm waited. "On Monday morning," Mercer stopped, started again. "I looked at you and I made a decision in about 2 seconds based on what I saw. And I knew when I was doing it that it wasn't clinical judgment. I want you to know I knew that. I want you to know it didn't make it less wrong. It made it worse." Malcolm looked at him for a moment. "When a parent tells you something about their child," Malcolm said, "the first question is not whether they have a credential. The first question is whether they're right. Most of the time they are. They live inside that child's life every day. You see them for an hour." He paused. "That's the part worth remembering." Mercer nodded once, the small nod of a man who understood he had been given something he had not quite earned and intended to be more careful with it. Malcolm collected his documents and walked out. The institutional changes came over the following months, the way institutional changes do, not overnight, but methodically, with the particular momentum of organizations that have been given sufficient cause and sufficient documentation, and can no longer credibly claim ignorance. The Langford production run was recalled. The original component specification was reinstated. An independent technical review process was established that included input from the device's inventor, a role that did not require Malcolm to return to institutional medicine, but required the institution to consult him before making decisions that affected the device. The community pricing program was relaunched. This time, it had an operating budget rather than a press release. A patient advocate was hired specifically for families of pediatric cardiac patients. The role included ensuring preoperative access protocols accounted for the reality that not all paperwork is processed in the same timeline, and that a parent who had filed a medical proxy form the week prior should not be barred from their child's bedside because a bureaucratic confirmation had not caught up. The hospital named its Pediatric Cardiac Support Fund after Lena Pierce. It was a small thing in the way of things. The check that established it was substantial. The board had proposed this, and Malcolm had accepted, and he did not feel triumphant about it. He felt the ordinary, heavy satisfaction of a thing done that should have been done a long time ago. "Doctor," Harlan asked him, 3 weeks after the board meeting, whether he would consider returning to the research work. She showed him the lab. It was the same room it had always been, smaller than he remembered, with a whiteboard on the far wall that still had a partial diagram of a valve assembly he'd drawn 6 years prior, never fully erased. His name was still on the placard by the door. "That's where it'd have to be different," he said. "I can't be here full time. I have a son." "I know," Harlan said. "We can build something that doesn't require you to choose. Nobody has ever successfully built that. Then you'd be building something new. You're good at that." He looked at the room for a long time. He thought about his mother at the hospital on Clement Street, hands flat on the kitchen table. He thought about the children who got transferred. He thought about what Lena had said about guardrails. "Not yet," he said, "but tell me what you're thinking." 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, Malcolm brought Eli to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. The boy was walking with the particular energy of a child who had been told for a long time to be careful, and had recently been told to stop worrying so much. He had 2 dinosaurs in his jacket pockets. He had gotten the all-clear to play soccer in the fall. While they waited at the main reception desk for a visitor badge to be printed, a man came through the front entrance behind them. He was perhaps 40, in a heavy coat, moving with the forward lean of someone who had driven a long way and was not sure he had enough time. He stopped at the desk and said his daughter was in pre-op on the 4th floor and he was her father. The receptionist looked at his ID, looked at the screen. "And your name is listed in the system as..." "It should be there," the man said. His voice was careful in the way of someone working to keep it even. "I'm her father. I drove 4 hours." A different nurse, young, with a still pristine badge, had come up beside the main desk to drop off a chart. She heard the exchange. She looked at the man. She looked at the elevator bank. "Sir," she said, "what's your daughter's name?" "Grace. Grace Whitfield. She's 6, the nurse nodded. She came around the desk. "Come with me. The pre-op unit is this way. She's probably been asking for you." The man's shoulders came down an inch. Something in his face went from controlled to human in a single moment. He followed her to the elevator. Malcolm watched the doors close. Eli was looking up at him with the uncomplicated attention he brought to everything he found interesting. "Daddy," Eli said. "They let him through." "Yeah," Malcolm said. "Did someone have to make that happen?" Malcolm looked at the closed elevator doors for a moment. "A lot of people," he said, "over a long time." Eli processed this. He reached into his pocket and straightened one of the dinosaurs so it faced forward. "Good," he said. "There is a kind of person who moves through the world with their credentials visible, on their lapels, in their titles, in the way rooms shift when they enter." Malcolm Pierce had been that person once, and had watched what the world did with that version of him, and had found it wanting. What he knew now, at 41, with grease still occasionally on his sleeve, and a son who drew armored hearts and asked questions that cut cleanly through the soft tissue of complicated things, was that the work he had done mattered less because of the name on it, and more because of what it was built for. He had built it for children who needed a door in the right place. He had built it because his mother came home from the hospital some evenings and sat in the kitchen, in the silence of people who had done everything they could and still lost something. He had built it because Lena had asked him to build it for the right reason, and because that reason was still the right one, and would remain so regardless of what the system did or failed to do with it. A system that can only see a person when their name is printed on a document has not yet learned to see people. That was the problem he was working on now. It was harder than the valve repair. It did not have a patent number. It would not be finished by the time Eli started high school, or college, or had children of his own. But the elevator doors had opened on a Tuesday morning, and a nurse with a still pristine badge had made a choice that did not require anyone's approval, and a man in a heavy coat had followed her through, And in a room on the 4th floor, a 6-year-old girl named Grace had looked up from her hospital pillow and seen her father's face. That was the measurement. Malcolm used Nitchow. Not recognition, not vindication. Just the door opening before it was too late.